George Hamilton, the gentleman who turned Hollywood and power into his stage. When George Hamilton dated Linda Bird Johnson, daughter of President Lyndon B. Johnson, the story was never going to be just a Hollywood romance. One phone call from the White House summoned the FBI to scrutinize his life. Overnight, a young actor who had once walked red carpets freely found himself under the cold gaze of power. Investigations, rumors, relentless observation. Fame, he realized, could be a trap when it brushed against influence. Have you ever wondered how someone survives being both adored and watched like a potential threat at the same time? What does it feel like to live in a world where every smile and every gesture is recorded in memory, or worse, in files? For Hamilton, the answer would unfold not just in Hollywood, but in a delicate dance between charisma and caution, freedom and surveillance, love and strategy. A childhood painted in glamour and loss. Hamilton's journey began long before cameras flashed. Born August 12, 1939, in Memphis, Tennessee, his childhood carried a Hollywood-style veneer: music, travel, social sophistication, thanks to his father, George Hamilton Sr., a conductor who moved fluidly between orchestras, and his mother, Jean, whose grace and poise suggested Southern refinement. Yet, this glamour was fragile. By age 5, his parents' marriage had collapsed, and the family moved to live with his maternal grandparents in Blytheville, Arkansas. It was a short-lived sanctuary. Both grandparents passed away by 1947, leaving young George to navigate grief and displacement at an age when most children are still learning to tie their shoelaces. What does a child do when the anchors of family vanish? For Hamilton, the answer lay in observation and adaptation. He learned quickly how to read a room, how to modulate his emotions, and how to present a composed front, a skill that would later become essential in Hollywood, where appearances often masked chaos. When his mother decided the next chapter of their lives, she flipped a coin to choose between New York or Hollywood. The coin landed on Hollywood, and George's life became a series of relocations: Beverly Hills, Boston, New York, Palm Beach. Each move demanded flexibility, each new school a test of social intelligence. By adolescence, Hamilton had cultivated an instinct for survival, mastering the subtle art of blending in while standing out, of seeming effortless while absorbing the lessons of every environment. Could it be that these early years, marked by loss and reinvention, were what forged his later ability to navigate fame and power with composure? Hollywood's door opens. In 1957, Hamilton returned to Hollywood with a clear, almost reckless goal: to act. The industry overflowed with handsome young men, many of whom vanished without a trace. Hamilton understood early that to stand out, he had to be impossible to ignore. He began with small television roles, each audition a chance to refine his craft, each rejection a lesson in persistence. His breakthrough arrived in 1959 with Crime and Punishment, USA, where he portrayed Robert Cole, a law student who kills and wrestles with guilt. This role demanded more than charm; it required emotional depth. For the first time, audiences glimpsed the fractures behind his sun-kissed smile, and critics began to take notice. Comparisons to Anthony Perkins helped him secure roles but also threatened to turn him into a copy of someone else. Could Hamilton navigate a path that allowed him to be admired for his own talent rather than someone else's shadow? Winning the Golden Globe for New Star of the Year and a BAFTA nomination in 1960 seemed like a ticket to stardom. Yet, every accolade also cemented an identity: the polished, handsome, charming playboy. Hollywood was quick to claim him, and the public quickly learned to expect a certain image. His role in Home from the Hill that same year tested him further, requiring subtlety in portraying a young man trapped by family and expectation. Hamilton passed the test, proving he could carry weighty roles, but at what cost to the image the industry now demanded of him? The golden cage of charm. By the early 1960s, Hamilton's charm was both a weapon and a liability. Studios offered scripts that reinforced his image. Audiences adored the playboy facade. Films like Where the Boys Are, 1960, cemented him as a college heartthrob, inadvertently constructing a gilded cage. Could one be truly free when the world only wanted a curated version of oneself? Attempts to showcase deeper talent in films like Light in the Piazza, 1962, proved his acting chops, yet the label persisted. The trap became suffocating. Being loved too easily was a subtle form of imprisonment. Hamilton's story raises a timeless question: how much of our identity is ours, and how much is what others insist we become? Reinvention as survival. Hamilton responded with strategy. By the 1970s, he quietly revolutionized his career. Moving into production, he began taking control of projects like Evil Conval, learning where money flowed, who made decisions, and how influence worked behind the scenes. Hollywood's machinery, which once threatened to define him, became a tool. He understood that survival in the industry required more than talent. It demanded insight, patience, and a calculated embrace of one's own image. Then came 1979 and Love at First Bite, a film that transformed Dracula into a disco-era aristocrat. Hamilton's tan, once a superficial trait, became a comedic weapon. His charm was not merely aesthetic but strategic. The film grossed $43.9 million on a $3 million budget, reaffirming Hamilton's status, not as a fading pretty boy, but as a savvy, self-aware brand. What does it mean when one's personal traits, once mocked, become instruments of power and artistry? He continued this pattern with Zorro, the Gay Blade, 1981, playing dual roles that flirted with controversy and clever social commentary. By embracing humor and subverting expectation, Hamilton earned another Golden Globe nomination. He had learned the essential Hollywood lesson: control the narrative, or the narrative controls you. Love in the shadow of power. Yet fame's trials extended far beyond Hollywood. His romance with Linda Bird Johnson was intoxicating but perilous. Every step they took was monitored, every word potentially reported. President Johnson didn't merely disapprove, he initiated FBI scrutiny into Hamilton's life, friends, and finances. A hunting trip at the Texas ranch symbolized the unspoken rules he now had to navigate. Survival near power required poise, composure, and the ability to read unspoken signals. Hamilton's experience with the Johnson family demonstrates a truth rarely spoken. Love can become transactional when proximity to influence exists. Could genuine intimacy survive in a world where affection invites surveillance? Their relationship ended without bitterness, leaving Hamilton with a nuanced understanding. Power can transform romance into reports, and public admiration into scrutiny. The art of self-definition. Throughout his life, Hamilton became an architect of identity. He learned that Hollywood could impose, but he could also negotiate, subvert, and play along on his own terms. His tan, charm, and wit were not mere superficialities. They were tools, carefully honed to achieve influence without surrendering authenticity. In doing so, Hamilton's story mirrors a broader human experience, the delicate balance between external expectations and internal truth. His personal style, immaculate suits, careful grooming, and an almost performative confidence, was more than vanity, it was armor. Behind every perfectly tanned smile lay intelligence, resilience, and strategic thinking. How often do we underestimate the power of personal branding, not as ego, but as a shield against a world eager to define us? Reflection, fame, power, and identity. George Hamilton's life poses enduring questions. How do we survive when both admiration and surveillance are constant companions? How do charm, humor, and poise become instruments of autonomy rather than tools of entrapment? And perhaps most poignantly, what does it mean to craft one's narrative in a world that insists on scripting you from birth to reputation? From the streets of Memphis to the red carpets of Hollywood, from the opulent homes of the rich to the shadowed halls of the White House, Hamilton navigated with elegance, intelligence, and a playful awareness of his own myth. He was not merely an actor. He was a student of human behavior, a strategist in a world that prizes both spectacle and secrecy. Every decision, every film choice, every public gesture, every carefully maintained tan, was a negotiation between identity and expectation. Could Hamilton have survived without this acute self-awareness? Perhaps not. Yet in his ability to transform superficial charm into enduring power, Hamilton offers a blueprint. Mastery of oneself can turn even the glare of fame into a stage upon which one performs not for others, but for one's own legacy. Conclusion. George Hamilton's story is more than a Hollywood biography. It is a study in resilience, adaptability, and the intricate interplay between power, love, and public image. By navigating fame with strategy and humor, by surviving love under scrutiny, and by crafting a persona that was both authentic and marketable, Hamilton demonstrated that charisma alone is not enough. It must be married to insight, patience, and courage. And so we return to the question that shadows his entire life. How does one live freely when every movement can be watched, every smile dissected, every choice scrutinized? Hamilton's answer was subtle yet profound. Charm and talent are merely tools. Awareness and strategy are what ensure survival and, ultimately, legacy. George Hamilton remains the gentleman who turned Hollywood and even power into his stage. But when you look closely at his life, you see something more than a string of headline moments and memorable images. You see a man who learned to shape an identity not only to entertain an audience, but to shield, leverage, and ultimately reinvent himself across decades. How do you build a life that's simultaneously performance and refuge? How do you keep a private self when your public self is currency? Hamilton's early years are the quiet scaffolding beneath the lights. Behind the tan and the one-liner was a boy who learned early that appearance could open doors where words sometimes failed. Those lessons were double-edged. They taught him the mechanics of charm and timing, but they also taught him to manage perception as if it were a delicate instrument. From that vantage point, he developed a kind of craftsmanship, an artistry around persona that was as deliberate as any acting technique. What does that do to a person's interior life? Does crafting oneself for the world steal authenticity, or does it become another form of truth? By 1972, the private and performative collided in the person of Alana Stewart. She was someone who could pierce the Hollywood polish and, importantly, chose to do so. Their Las Vegas wedding, impulsive, cinematic, and officiated under the faint buzz of neon and rumor, was emblematic of Hamilton's life philosophy. Make a choice, treat it like a scene, and commit to it with flair. Elvis Presley's manager, an almost absurd witness to the moment, folded the ceremony into the mythology of show business. Yet behind the glitz there was tenderness and the complex arithmetic of love between two people who both understood performance. Could love between two actors still be private? Could partnership survive the constant glare of the cameras? When Ashley Hamilton arrived in 1974, George met a very different kind of audience: fatherhood. The stage lights meant something new. Now they bordered a life that required steadiness, presence, and a discipline that performance didn't always demand. Suddenly, there were choices he couldn't make purely for spectacle. There were morning feedings and pediatrician visits, small domestic rituals that pierced the grander narratives of style and public image. Parenthood forced a reckoning. How much of him was performance, and what did he owe to the private person entrusted to his care? The laughter and the polished interviews could not answer the question of how to be present at a soccer match, a school recital, or a late-night worry when the cameras were gone. Divorce came in 1976, but so did an unusual partnership. Hamilton and Stewart continued to work together, co-parenting with a mix of humor, loyalty, and mutual respect that defied tabloid expectations. Watching them navigate a split and then collaborate in later years made people ask, can couples who fail at marriage still succeed at partnership? Their dynamics suggested that sometimes a relationship's public form isn't the most honest measure of its value. They turned a private reconfiguration into a public example of civility. Were they teaching the public about grace, or simply discovering it for themselves? The 1980s introduced new complications. Hamilton's world, long dominated by lights and laughter, collided with geopolitics and money in a way that few actors experience. A trip to the Philippines to promote Love at First Bite led to interactions with Imelda Marcos and others whose finances were already wrapped in controversy. Loans and transfers that passed through his accounts, awkward administrative traces of a world he had entered for work and publicity, suddenly cast a shadow over a man whose image had been so carefully curated. He became, to some degree, a reluctant character in a larger scandal. Although never prosecuted, the episodes left marks. How do you recover a reputation that depends on a more glamorous, simpler narrative? How do you balance legal innocence with reputational ambiguity? Rather than retreat into denial, Hamilton responded with ingenuity. He took a feature of his persona that had often been ridiculed, his prodigious tan, and turned it into an asset. Where others might have folded, he built a business. The George Hamilton skincare and sun care lines, launched in the late 1980s, were more than product lines. They were emblematic of a man who understood supply and demand for image itself. What had been a joke became a pragmatic pivot. Were people buying sun lotion, or were they buying the fantasy of glamour he embodied? The salons, the marketing, the celebrity endorsements, each move converted attention into capital. The very image that had felt like a prison became a vehicle for independence. The Hamilton Cigar Lounge, opened in Las Vegas in 1997, was the next act in that long strategy. Imagine stepping into one of those rooms, low light, deep leather, a hum of conversation where the world's troubles were filtered through laughter and smoke. It wasn't merely about selling cigars, it was about selling an atmosphere, a private club experience that sold nostalgia, taste, and the unmistakable scent of leisure. Hamilton named cigars after roles and moments in his career, and that wink to the audience, "Remember that scene?" was pure brand theater. In the end, the craze faded, as trends do, and he left with the same grace he had brought to every exit. What do we gain when we sell an experience rather than a product? Is it more transient or more real? In the decades that followed, Hamilton's career was a study in adaptability. Reality television offered a new stage, less elegant in some ways, but closer to the pulse of a younger audience. Dancing with the Stars in 2006 and I'm a Celebrity. Get Me Out of Here, UK, in 2009 showed him willing to make himself vulnerable and ridiculous in service of connection. These weren't humiliations so much as strategic humility. He knew that audiences connect with imperfection as much as with polish. How do you balance dignity with the willingness to laugh at yourself? Can vulnerability be the new strength? Television cameos, small sparkles like his 2016 appearance on Two Broke Girls, were evidence of a carefully measured visibility. Rather than saturate the market, Hamilton picked moments that amplified rather than diluted his brand. And then there was the audacious KFC campaign where he appeared as a tanned, white-suited Colonel Sanders. What if parody could be a form of homage? What if the internet's appetite for memes could be harnessed rather than feared? Hamilton's willingness to wink at himself and at his own image was a masterstroke in brand modernization. He didn't pretend to be timeless. He leaned into the absurd and let the public have its fun. What emerges across this long life is not a sequence of disconnected showbiz stunts, but a consistent pattern of observation, risk, and recalibration. Hamilton's choices always contained a spectator's mind. Who is watching? What do they expect? What reaction will this provoke? He treated fame not as a static trophy, but as a set of levers. Pull the right one and you could open a door to a new audience, a new revenue stream, or simply a new chapter. Yet underneath those calculations was a personal code, charm, intelligence, and humor blended into an ethic of survival. Could that be taught, or is it an instinct? The deeper contours of Hamilton's character reveal contradictions that made him interesting and, to many, oddly inspiring. He was self-aware enough to know when to bow out. Timing mattered to him not just in comedy, but in life. He was resilient enough to turn scandal into entrepreneurship. He was playful enough to join sitcoms and reality shows without losing dignity. But he was also, in quiet moments, a man who saw the cost of constant performance. There were evenings after premieres when the limo left him at the curb and he had to take a long walk home, thinking about what it meant to be loved for an image rather than the man beneath. How many of us perform to be loved? How many of us confuse applause for intimacy? Hamilton's relationships with peers and audiences show a rare emotional intelligence. He understood how to make friends in an industry that is often transactional. Producers, writers, and younger actors found him approachable, partly because he didn't seem to take himself so seriously that he became brittle. He cultivated mentors and, later, ments. Those handoffs of career wisdom were small acts of generosity that rarely make headlines but shape legacies. What is mentorship if not another channel for reinvention? There is also a practical side to Hamilton that deserves attention. He kept an eye on timing and trends and habitually audited his own image portfolio. When an idea stopped selling, whether a salon fad or a lounge, he cut loose and moved on. That discipline of exit is an underrated life skill. Know when to stay, and know when staying becomes the opposite of strategy. Do we ever tell ourselves that staying is loyalty when it is actually fear of change? The arc of his later career, cameos, commercials, reality TV, and business ventures, illustrates a modern approach to celebrity. Diversify, humanize, and be ready to laugh at yourself. The KFC campaign was emblematic of this shift. Hamilton took a parody and turned it into performance art. The internet loves to flatten personas into jokes, but Hamilton reclaimed the joke and made it profitable. That's a lesson in creative appropriation. If the narrative around you becomes caricature, can you not make it art? Throughout, Hamilton's life has been an invitation to ask bigger questions about success and endurance. Is success the accumulation of trophies and headlines, or is it the sustained ability to adapt, to move from scandal to enterprise, from elite salons to late-night cameos, without losing coherence? Is longevity measured by awards, or by the capacity to remain interesting to new audiences across generations? And then there is the more intimate question. What do you do with your identity when the world expects you to be a caricature? Hamilton demonstrates that identity need not be static. He reframed his tan, his smile, his accentuated manner as instruments rather than limitations. He used them to teach the world, subtly, that labels can be tools of liberation rather than cages. How might you take a trait others mock and turn it into your signature strength? There are lessons here for anyone operating in high-pressure arenas: politics, business, entertainment, or even social media. Observation matters. Timing is a skill. Resilience is not stoicism. It is the cunning ability to change your playbook without losing yourself. Humor is more than levity. It's armor and bait. What would happen if you treated your reputation as a set of assets to be stewarded rather than a single truth to be defended? In the end, George Hamilton's life asks a deceptively simple question that echoes long after the applause fades. What defines success? Is it fame, fortune, or power? Or is it the ability to remain adaptable, humane, and creatively alive across eras and expectations? He never pretended to be without weakness. Instead, he built a career that accepted the inevitable mistakes and made them part of the act. What strikes you most about George Hamilton's story? His resilience, his cunning, his uncanny ability to turn adversity into performance, or his willingness to laugh at himself? If you were to take one of his strategies into your life, which would it be? The discipline to exit gracefully, the ingenuity to monetize perception, or the courage to be vulnerable on a new stage? Hamilton didn't win by universal adoration. He won by mastering the rules of the game and bending them creatively. His showmanship was an education in survival and self-authorship. He taught a generation that elegance and intelligence can be power, and that humor is often the most durable shield. So when you think about your own narrative, what you present to the world, what you hide, and what you might reclaim, ask yourself, how much of your public self is deliberate? How much is accidental? And if the public has already written a version of you dislike, can you not become the author of the next chapter? George Hamilton's journey is more than a celebrity biography. It is a blueprint for reinvention. From boyhood instability to Hollywood stardom, political scrutiny, entrepreneurial pivots, and brand mastery, he transformed every challenge into an opportunity. The tan, the smile, the charm were never mere surface features. They were tools of endurance, leverage, and spectacle. He made his life a long performance and then taught the world how to applaud not only the performance, but the person who orchestrated it. If you leave this story with one question, let it be this: when the next stage appears in your life, unexpected, risky, and public, will you step into it with the same combination of polish, humor, and stubborn curiosity?